Next on NCBA's Cattleman to Cattleman.
Hundreds of cattlemen from across the country gather in Washington, D.C.
You know, some of these folks think that manure is a hazardous waste material, and we're here to prove them wrong on that.
Making sure that we still have the ability to slaughter or process animals in this country.
As a public land user or a private land user, you're either talking with about grizzly bears or wolves being reintroduced, or as we have in our country, prairie dogs.
Hear their experiences next.
And now, NCBA's Cattleman to Cattleman with your host, Susie Ross.
Hello and welcome to NCBA's Cattleman to Cattleman. I'm Susie Ross. In this week's cattle industry news, USDA's prospective plantings report certainly has the cattle industry's attention, especially with regard to corn acres. Predictions of increased corn acres came true, at least for now. USDA anticipates over 90 million acres planted. That's 12 million more than last year and more than most market analysts were estimating just a few weeks ago. This could be very good news for cattlemen, but experts caution the corn isn't in the ground just yet.
It's the largest we've seen in nearly 50 years, actually about 60 years. But we need to remember that the crop isn't out in the ground yet, and it's a long ways from being in the bin, so even though it's good news short term, we still have to see how the crop develops to see if we get some longer term relief.
The U.S. and South Korea are proceeding with a free trade agreement, but will it include access for U.S. beef? Cattlemen say the only real proof will be resumption of sales in Korea. Until then, NCBA will withhold its support of the agreement. Many members of Congress have pledged to do the same. As hats and boots took over the capital city, participants were greeted with a whopping surprise visit from none other than the President of the United States. During his speech to cattlemen, President Bush noted the importance of U.S. beef trade and thanked cattle producers for their support.
Not a bad introduction by a cowboy. Thanks for having me. Welcome to Washington. I'm glad to be with you. I was telling Laura this morning, I'm really looking forward to going over to talk to the nation's cattlemen. I appreciate being with people who understand the importance of faith, family, hard work, good values. I like to remind people every day is Earth Day if you make a living off the land.
We'll have a full report on the President's visit and a look at the President's contributions to our industry in next week's show. Each year, cattle producers make this trip to Washington, D.C. for NCBA's annual spring conference. Cattlemen made a lasting impression on the Hill and held meetings with regulatory agencies that work on cattle issues. Producers met one-on-one with their senators and representatives, giving them a face-to-face look at what cattle producers need from Congress. Many were met with assurances of how important these visits are.
Oh, it's always a welcome sight to see the Stetsons show up into town, and you know that you're going to get, a good common sense approach to public policy. But it's just important that more ranchers and cattlemen participate in these types of opportunities because fewer and fewer members of Congress have any connection at all to the land.
The week in Washington included the annual NCBA reception, sponsored by Outback Steakhouse, at the Capitol, which was packed with an estimated 1,000 attendees from both House and Senate offices. Along with both President Bush and Agriculture Secretary Johans, cattle producers heard firsthand from the head of the House Agriculture Committee, Colin Peterson.
The conservation community, the broadest based coalition I've seen, has come together and asked for $7.5 billion additional dollars over 10 years. And what that would do would plus up equip so that we could get at the backlog.
Chairman Peterson visited with the cattlemen about a variety of topics from the Farm Bill, including conservation. Peterson hopes additional resources will be available to pay for the backlog of EQIP applicants. Preparation for NCBA's legislative meeting begins well before boots hit the ground in Washington. State cattlemen's associations work with their members to identify the issues they need to take to their lawmakers. We met up with cattleman Jay Wolf at his bull sale in Nebraska the week before he headed to the nation's capital. At the Wagon Hammer Bull Sale in O'Neill, Nebraska, Jay Wolf is selling 140 bulls and 15 heifers in his biggest sale of the year. Wolf is a third-generation diversified cattleman. He has a 4,500 head feed yard, but his primary operation is a ranch. When he wasn't busy at the sale, Wolf was busy preparing for his trip to NCBA's spring conference in Washington. Wolf says it's an important trip for him to make.
For our political leaders, they really like to see, the the producers come and visit with them. We have staff and they visit with them quite a bit, but it just means more to them if the people that are actually affected directly by legislation come and talk to them about it. We're concerned about EPA's regulations of dust. In addition to that, the Farm Bill is coming up this go-around, and there's a lot of those issues that will affect livestock producers. Foreign trade, certainly want to see free trade with South Korea. And then ethanol. The national policy on ethanol has been really a front burner issue for cattlemen.
Top on Wolf's list of concerns, feed prices. Even though he lives in the middle of corn country and the corn plantings report indicates some relief may be in sight, Wolf says the pinch of feed prices is hitting his operation, just like ranchers and farmers all over the country.
If you get 5 cattlemen together, you get 6 opinions. We're a diverse state, and it's affected everybody in their own way. Certainly, corn has more than doubled in price, and it's caused calf prices to drop at one point more than 20%. And that's a significant impact on cow-calf operators. Cattle feeders are in the middle, and for the initial rise in corn prices caught a lot of them with high-priced calves, but they hadn't purchased all the feed they needed necessarily, so there was a lot of money lost in cattle feeding. However, in the long term, cattle feeders in Nebraska are going to have access to distillers' grains, and it probably gives them some competitive edge against cattle feeders from the southern plains. A lot of our producers raise corn and in Nebraska, and they certainly are the beneficiaries of higher priced corn, and they'd all tell you, heck, it's about time.
We'll hear more from Jay and other cattlemen who attended the D.C. meeting throughout the show. Ahead on NCBA's Cattleman to Cattleman, we'll continue our spring conference special with a look at issues affecting cattlemen from coast to coast. Plus,
at spring conference, cowboys head to Capitol Hill to meet with their congressman. I'm Jim Witt. Ahead, I'll show you how cattlemen get her done in the nation's capital and which issues are getting attention this year.
In 1874, an innovation changed the beef industry forever. It was called barbed wire, and it brought an end to open range grazing and began a whole new era of cattle management. Today there's another breakthrough innovation changing the beef industry. It's called Draxxin, and it's one more way Pfizer Animal Health is working with veterinarians and cattlemen to open up a whole new era in animal health. To learn more about Draxxin, talk to your veterinarian.
Purina's wind and rain minerals are research tested and field proven to provide balanced mineral nutrition essential for cattle health, growth, and reproduction. They're highly palatable so cattle consume what they need when they need it. And wind and rain minerals special formulation resists the elements so they won't blow out of the feeder and maintain their palatability even if they've been wet. Wind and rain cattle minerals from Purina Mills, building better cattle.
To some, it's just a pasture. But to you, it's part of a livelihood to be passed along. That's why Fort Dodge Animal Health developed Cydectin with pasture health in mind. Cydectin protects against performance-robbing internal and external parasites. And it's the only insecticide proven to have no adverse effects on beneficial dung beetle populations. Cydectin from Fort Dodge Animal Health, protecting your herd and your pasture, so they can both be passed along.
And now, this week's Management Minute.
EPDs are expected progeny differences, and they're just one of the tools we have for bull selection. The essence of EPDs are that you use those to compare potential bulls that you might purchase to use in your herd, and then you are able to predict how their progeny should perform or the differences in their average progeny. How do you decide which traits to emphasize when you're selecting bulls using EPD? Well, you've got to think about the goals of your operation, what sources of income do you have, and where are your costs arising from. For instance, if you're in a cow-calf production scenario, your primary source of income is from the sale of weaned calves, and you're retaining your own female replacements. what's important. Look at where you're getting your money, wean calf, cull cow sales, what are your costs, maintaining the cows, and making sure cows have a long, productive lifespan.
Cattlemen's Capital Concerns, brought to you by Fort Dodge Animal Health, makers of Sidectin Poron and Quest Equine Dewormers.
Welcome back to Cattleman. We go back to Washington as Cattleman to Cattleman's Jim Witt finds out what's on the minds of Florida and California farmers, ranchers, and their legislators.
So many cattlemen, whether they're from Florida or California, are facing pressure from urban sprawl and dealing with urban populations that really lack understanding about agricultural issues. Issues such as animal welfare, land values, and conservation. Cattleman to Cattleman followed the California and Florida delegations as they visited with their representatives in Congress about these critical issues. Florida cattlemen met with Congressman Tim Mahoney, a first-term Democrat in the U.S. House of Representatives.
The cattle industry is very interesting because it's just more than an industry. It's our culture, it's our heritage as Americans. And the other thing that's exciting about agriculture and the cattle industry now is that people are just starting to realize just how important our food supply is and how important it is that we maintain our independence for food, just like we now realize that how foolish it is not to be independent on oil and energy.
California ranchers met with Representative Kevin McCarthy, a first-term Republican, and discussed transportation, environment, and tax issues.
There is an ability that we get greater funding, that we can keep the ability to have these ranches in the family's hands, to keep the ability to still do what they've done through the years. And what I've seen in the Farm Bill in the past is not enough money, one, to go forward because of the land prices in California, and two, when you look for long-term, is the inheritance tax. That's coming up 2010, and the new majority here in Washington is thinking of going backwards on that. Now, I think that is an unfair advantage. I think people should be able to hand the growth down, but the land value that cattlemen have is tremendous. But the value that they have in their pocket, they shouldn't have to sell their land and pay capital gains tax, not even to keep what they've had to hand down to generation after generation.
Cattlemen from all across the country have kept their congressman busy today. This is Jim Witt from Capitol Hill.
On the Hill, cattlemen made it clear ranching and farming families need to be protected to preserve our nation's landscape and maintain our position as beef producer to the world. Cattlemen from Arkansas discussed two key issues with their Senator, Blanche Lincoln, a Democrat with ag roots. First on the agenda, the death tax.
I've supported everything. I've supported full repeal, which is not practical right now. We've spent over $400 billion in Iraq. But we can get something that is meaningful, and that's what we should strive to do.
The current law has a phase-in of exemptions and total repeal in 2010. But total repeal is only effective in 2010, and if the law is not made permanent, the death tax returns to its high tax rates in 2011.
You go back to a 1.5 million exemption and a 49% rate, I think. It's just unacceptable. You work hard all your life, and it's not so that at the end of the day, the government can come take it.
Senator Lincoln, along with Senator Pete Domenici from New Mexico, are the co-sponsors of a bill that proposes to exempt manure from environmental laws, called Superfund laws.
The bill that we've introduced makes clear the fact that farming operations are not subject to Superfund. And I've tried to remind my colleagues of some of the other family-owned businesses that have really lost that status. The scrap metal industry is the example I always use because roughly 85% of the scrap metal folks were family-owned businesses when I first came here in 92. You know, now it's less than 50% of them are family-owned, and it's because they couldn't survive the liability of the unknown. It's one thing to think that, you know, you're going to have to be subject to a law like a Superfund or the possibility of being declared a Superfund site. Because of your animal manure. But it's another thing to have to spend the resources, the dollars that you could be investing back into your family business and spend those dollars on protecting yourself from the liability when you don't even know if you're liable.
Let your lawmakers know manure is not a toxic waste and they need to support Senator Lincoln's bill to exempt manure in the Superfund laws. Visit senate.gov. It's a program designed to help beef producers improve their operation. Next, we'll introduce you to a program in the Agriculture Department that focuses on natural resources conservation. We'll be right back.
From fresh tomatoes to potatoes and chicken to beef, we're as picky about our quality ingredients as you are. Because that's what we're made of.
There ain't no bugs on me. There ain't no bugs on me. There may be bugs on some you mugs, but there ain't no bugs on me.
Canine Advantix is the one that repels and kills disease-spreading fleas, ticks, and mosquitoes. Frontline Plus doesn't repel and isn't effective against mosquitoes. So ask your veterinarian for Canine Advantix, the one that repels and kills.
Yeah, there may be bugs on some of you mugs, but there ain't no bugs on me.
NCBA's Cattleman to Cattleman, a television show by cattlemen for cattlemen.
Hi, I'm Tim Mahoney from Florida, and you're watching Cattleman to Cattleman.
Welcome back to NCBA's Cattleman to Cattleman. Some government programs are actually built to help cattlemen improve their operations. Cattleman to Cattleman's Jim Witt learned about an agency that runs such programs. Called the Natural Resources Conservation Services, NRCS is part of the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Here in Washington, the NRCS runs conservation programs important to cattlemen. Since 1935, the agency has worked with producers to help sustain agricultural productivity and ensure environmental quality. We caught up with NRCS Chief Arlen Lancaster to discuss current priorities.
Our mission is helping people help the land. It doesn't get any simpler and doesn't get any better than that. We have voluntary programs where we help landowners reach their conservation goals.
NRCS looks at cattlemen as both customers and partners.
They will be making the decisions on their land. We're going to give them the advice and we're going to help them with tools, but ultimately they're the ones that are going to implement changes on the ground. I have yet to meet a rancher that does not want to pass that operation on to their children and grandchildren. They want it to be a sustainable operation, a productive operation. And so if they have the information on changes that they can implement, they're going to do that. And our job is to help them with different types of practices.
A recent success story involves the Johnson family of Utah, recently honored by NCBA as an Environmental Stewardship Award winner.
We've got a big issue with juniper encroachment on those lands. You know, years of fire suppression has resulted in really an unnatural plant community. And so their efforts, along with conservation districts, NRCS, other federal agencies and state wildlife agencies, to go in there and control that juniper pinion has resulted in increased forage, a more natural habitat, one that's more healthy in terms of your natural fire systems. But again, they've created a system where they've improved the carrying capacity of that land. And that's an operation. I think he said he was the 5th generation on that land, and the 6th and 7th is there, and they're ready to take over.
Neighbors also benefit from the Johnson's efforts.
The community, which most of their water supply was well provided, started to get some salt in that water because where they were in the salt table. Taking out all that juniper allowed more water into the system and addressed not only the ranchers' needs, but the community's needs.
Many cattlemen know NRCS best for the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, or EQIP.
And it's probably our most flexible financial assistance program, our cost share program. Again, our core function is to provide that technical assistance to landowners, but we also have some tools that Congress has given us to help landowners. EQIP is a cost share program. We're able to cost share both on structures as well as practices. And as part of the statute, 60% of those dollars need to be targeted towards livestock.
EQIP funding can be of significant assistance.
Generally 50% cost share, but up to 75% cost share. And in the cases of beginning farmers and ranchers or limited resource producers, up to 90% cost share on those practices. So when you've got successful agriculture, you're going to see more conservation on the ground. With a cost share program, you're helping to reduce some of the costs of those practices, and landowners will implement those practices.
To find out more about the expertise available through NRCS, go to cattlemantocattleman.org. Spring Conference is a busy time for those who are able to visit Washington, D.C. Ahead, we'll check back in with Jay Wolf to get his final thoughts on his legislative experience.
Agriculture is a small portion of the population now, and if we're not working together, we're not going to get anywhere.
As our family, we cannot be in Washington, D.C. all the time, and I just couldn't live without NCBA representing.
They're looking out for our interests. They're there fighting for us every day.
If you got 1 cow or 2 cows or 100 cows, you need to be a member.
I'm a member of the NCBA because a long time ago, 35 years ago, I felt that I needed to know more of what my industry is doing. So I got started at the county level. If you're in the cattle industry, now's the time to join and let your voice be heard loud and clear.
You need NCBA working for you, and NCBA needs you. It's easy to join. Just call, get online, or talk with your state affiliate and sign up today.
NCBA's Cattleman to Cattleman, a television show by cattlemen for cattlemen.
We are the cattle industry of America. We are the Cattle Association in America, and we bring that thought as we come to Washington. So we do influence how they think and how they vote, because they're not speaking only to the large ranchers and feeders in America, but also to the small ranchers and feeders, the everyday small producer as well as the large producer. So we have a great impact because we're all grassroots people, and we're bringing our thoughts here as to what we need to continue this industry into the future.
Let's check back in with Cattleman Jay Wolf. After 2 solid days of legislative and regulatory meetings, Wolf says cattlemen made a difference during their visit and continue to make a difference through the NCBA staff who represent cattlemen every day in Washington, D.C.
They really like to hear from us. They trust us, and they really look to us for our opinions on issues that affect the cattle industry. I think anybody who would take the time to come to these meetings and see really what NCBA is doing for the cattle industry, you would just have to be impressed. There are just so many things that they're trying to work for on our behalf. So even if you have an issue that you don't like, there's just another 99 that they're doing an outstanding job about. Most of them you probably don't even know.
To learn more about Cattleman's trip to D.C., go to cattlemantocattleman.org. Those families who went to Washington are back on the ranch, but the political issues never cease. After hearing from cattlemen, more than 40 members of Congress have signed up to co-sponsor environmental and tax legislation in support of cattlemen. NCBA continues to urge members of Congress to join the fight. After a short spring recess, Congress is back in full swing. They are expected to deal with the Colombia, Peru, and Panama free trade agreements, which would open markets for U.S. beef. Finally, a number of hearings are coming up this week and next, dealing with ag issues. We will keep you posted on cattlemen who testify. This week's legacy photos come from the 2007 Spring Conference in Washington, D.C. Let's take a look. Please keep sending those photos. Head to cattlemantocattleman.org and don't forget to include details about your operation. Next week, a special edition of Cattleman to Cattleman as President George Bush visits Spring Conference. We'll have an in-depth look at his speech and important cattle industry issues. Thanks for joining us on NCBA's Cattleman to Cattleman. Be sure to tune in next week. A new episode airs every Tuesday night at 8:30 Eastern Time, right here on RFD TV.